Hello everyone, KD8LKQ here. I'm here to give you a rundown on my APRS system. The things that I've run into, some of the mistakes that I've made, and some solutions that hopefully some of you are searching for, and hopefully this information will be useful to you. So, I wanted to get into APRS. I have an amateur radio license, KD8LKQ. And I wanted to use my laptop that I already had mounted in my vehicle for mapping and music and etc. So this is what I ended up with. I have an ICOM IC-2720 and it is hooked up to Coastal Works TNC-Pi 2, I believe they call it. And that sits on top of a Raspberry Pi, which is sitting on top of a Linksys W54G router. WRT54G. And connected to the router is my Panasonic Toughbook. On the Panasonic Toughbook, we are running APRSIS32, which is, if you haven't checked out this software and you're doing things with APRS on PC, I would very highly recommend it. This is the simplest, user-friendly software that I've come by. However, it still has many features and options that I have not yet learned, but it's pretty quick in getting you going and using it. It comes pre-configured to download the map tile set from, I believe it's Open Maps, and it can save those maps in its cache and you can use them offline, which is a very nice feature. So that's kind of what we have going on in the hardware scene. Let's talk a little bit about configurations and softwares and things like that. Let's first look at the ICOM radio. I would like to thank a fella. Let me pull up his website. Oh, first, let's talk about the TNC-Pi. If you're interested in getting one of these are one of the most inexpensive TNCs that I've come across. It works very nicely. You can go to tnc-x.com. They make it to fit specifically on the Raspberry Pi. They can fit on Raspberry Pi 1, and they have this version that I'm using on the Raspberry Pi 2, which I also believe is capable to work on the Raspberry Pi 3. The Raspberry Pi can also be set up to work, instead of just on serial mode, you can connect through I2C and you can stack multiple TNCs and have them all communicating with the same Raspberry Pi. A number of people have also set up their Raspberry Pis on touchscreens running Exaster, and they run a full APRS system in their vehicles or mobile boxes, as I'll show in a moment here. Yeah, they run it that way. So yeah, I would highly recommend you check them out. They're not limited to Raspberry Pis. They also make TNCs that are standalone units with COM ports or USB, and I believe even Bluetooth. But if you're looking for getting into it cheap, if you're already familiar with the Raspberry Pi, definitely look into this. I believe it's only $40 for the unassembled kit. So you can assemble it, attach it to your Raspberry Pi, hook it to your radio, and there you go. You will have to make your own cable, I imagine, to go from an RS-232 port to a mini DIN 5. Depending on what radio you have. I have the IC-2720, and it has a mini DIN 5 port for the data. Another thanks to W4RP. He has a nice page on his website, w4rp.com, concerning the IC-2720 and how to go about configuring it for APRS. Yeah, and there's a couple different settings that you have to make, changing the baud rate so that it knows that it's in data mode. And then of course he gives you a pinout for making your cable. And there's a side note, there's two different cable types. One's for the 9600 baud and one is for the 1200 baud. And that's just a matter of switching between two different pins on the DIN5. So thanks to him for helping me get the cable going and helping me know how to set the 2720's configuration. Another thanks, big thanks, goes out to N9SIR, Tony. He has made himself his own Raspberry Pi APRS system. This is his website, and there's the first one that he made. Looks like the Pi 1 and a Bofang radio. He's using the Exaster software. But he has a very, very nice rundown. He makes available a image of Raspberry Pi pre-configured with Exaster on it, and he's been very helpful in answering my emails and giving me some insight into Exaster, as well as some of the general settings on a Raspberry Pi and how to configure those. So there's a lot of pieces coming together to make this whole thing function correctly. And he gives a number of different videos, so definitely check out his site if you're going Raspberry Pi, or if you're just going Exaster for your APRS software. That's definitely something that you should look into. Yeah, I had lots of trouble configuring the Raspberry Pi to access the serial port. If you install the latest Raspbian on your Raspberry Pi, that I believe is the Jessie version, this is near the end of 2017 here, but a lot of the tutorials out there currently are for a different version, and they made a change, and as a result you do a couple different things to disable the console from taking control of the serial port. Once you've disabled the console, then you have to enable the serial port as a device, and from that point you can begin to use the serial port either through Exaster or through a different method that I use. But yeah, this was a nice, very nice article that I found explaining the differences, why they're doing what they're doing with the Raspberry Pis, and how to make those changes and get your serial port up and running. So I will put a link to that in the description of this video. So on my Raspberry Pi system, or my APRS system, as you can see, I have all that equipment, but what's going on here is the APRS packets are coming in. They're being sent in audio over to the TNC, which is decoding the packets from the AX25 protocol into regular data, and sending that through the serial port to the Raspberry Pi. I have my Raspberry Pi set up with a program called SIR2net, SIR, the number 2, NET. And what that does is it basically ports the serial port to a LAN port on the Raspberry Pi. Then I have the Raspberry Pi networked with this router. This router is not connected to the internet, and it eventually will be mounted in my vehicle. I have an external antenna set up for that, so that my laptop, whether I'm in the vehicle or if I'm perhaps my vehicle is parked in a parking lot and I'm inside the building, if I have connection to my Wi-Fi from that router, then I can connect to it, and I will have access to the information, the packets being sent back and forth on the APRS. So I'll have access to APRS through my mobile radio if I have a connection to my Wi-Fi. This system would also loan itself very nicely to, what do they call it? I'm still learning about this. It's the broadband ham. It's basically a firmware that people have written for the Linksys to operate on a specific channel that amateur radio operators are licensed to use, but they're licensed to use it with a higher power and a much better antenna than traditional licensing for regular computers. And they set up a mesh network using these Linksys adapters. So in a situation, I could perhaps maybe set up one of these routers for the mesh network, and then I would be able to offer APRS to that mesh network wherever that network may go. You can connect into that network anywhere then and have access to the APRS information on that COM port, sending and receiving and tracking all the information. So a lot of benefits in that direction as well. However, you don't have to go that route. You can do Exaster, and you can also run it headless. By headless, running the Raspberry Pi headless, what that means is you connect to the Raspberry Pi through VNC, Virtual Network Connection. So if I connect to the IP address of my Raspberry Pi, it goes and logs me in, and here I'm in the Raspberry Pi. You can run full screen even. And it's just like having a keyboard and mouse hooked to the Raspberry Pi. From here you could, if I went through the trouble of typing, which I'm not going to since I'm holding the camera, but you can disable the serial to net program that currently has access to the COM port that packets are being sent on. I could disable that, and then I could turn on Exaster and begin to use APRS through Exaster. However, the Raspberry Pi at this time does not have, or at least my Raspberry Pi does not have a GPS attached to it, so I would be limited in that respect because I wouldn't be able to broadcast my active location. Future plans, though, I hope to program the Raspberry Pi to know when my laptop is connected or not, and when it is not connected and the vehicle is on, I want the Raspberry Pi to free up the COM port and then start Exaster so that it works as a tracking or a tracker. So you can VNC into your Raspberry Pi and start doing things there. You know what? I will go ahead. I'm going to log in. I believe I have it. And I will edit out my command for running the Raspberry Pi. That's this one here. And that. These commands are set up to run on boot, so I'm going to go ahead and quit. And yes, I will save changes, and we'll go ahead and reboot. When it reboots, the serial to net will not be running, and then I'll go ahead and show you Exaster, and you can see the packets coming in that way. So it has finished rebooting. Go ahead and open up console. Sudo Exaster. That is not spelled right. Typing one-handed messes up my spelling. There we go. So Exaster boots up. I have to reconfigure it But you would go through your configuration and be set up on Exaster to run that way. Should have gotten that ready before I started the video, huh? Alright, so we'll re-enable that, save changes, and reboot. I'll go ahead and close the VNC because I don't need to be into that. So, thank you N9SIR for your help in configuring the Raspberry Pi and getting your image and things up and running. So another nifty thing that I would like to share with you all is called the Virtual Serial Port Emulator. It is a really versatile piece of software here. Basically with it you can take COM ports in and you can run splitters. So inside of my Toughbook I have a GPS. It is set for COM 50, but I'm porting it to COM 4, and COM 4 is a virtual connector. And what this software allows me to do, if I didn't have this software, I would be able to, for instance, I could run my APRS software here, which is the APRSIS32, and I could hook it up with a GPS, which it is right now, and you can see all of the SAT information here on the bottom. But this software actually allows me to split that GPS information, and at the same time that it's running, I can run DeLorme Street Atlas 2014. So the Street Atlas is really nice because it has all the streets, and I can find addresses and calculate routes, and the GPS information is made available to both programs. So definitely a wonderful piece of software because of that. But it's also doing another thing here. I have a COM 5 connector which works as a splitter, and then I also have a TCP client which is looking at that port that Serial to Net on the Raspberry Pi has made open, port 2001. And it is always, if it loses connection, it starts initializing, and if it regains connection, then it goes back to an OK status. So it's always trying to connect and create this virtual COM 5 connected to the Raspberry Pi. And then my APRS software is pointed to that COM 5, and it receives its APRS information through that. As well as sending information can go through that. So I don't have any other APRS software, but if for instance, if anyone knows of a good messaging software for APRS that can generate APRS messages and possibly trigger emails to be sent or things of that nature if an APRS message comes in, I would be very interested in knowing about that. But because of the Virtual Serial Port Emulator splitting the information that's coming from the APRS, I could hook up multiple APRS mapping softwares to the same port, which is very nifty. However, if you don't want to go this route, you don't have to use the Virtual Serial Port emulators. You just won't be able to split your GPS into multiple applications. However, the APRSIS32 does have the options of creating ports that point to TCP/IP. So you can set it up to connect to the IP address of the Raspberry Pi as well as the port number. Another thing that I don't have set up at the moment, but am going to set up, the WTR54G, router can be hooked up. I already have DDWRT firmware on it, but it can be set up so that it recognizes the MAC address of the Raspberry Pi and will always give it the same IP address, so I never have to worry about the Raspberry Pi logging on, getting a different IP address, and then my virtual serial port adapter not being able to find it. It'll always be the same one every time. So that'll be good to set up in that respect, to make sure that that happens. And may have some options in there as well. I know that the router can be set up and configured over SSH. I have some sneaky thoughts in mind to set it up so, like, when I'm at home, the router could be set up to automatically connect to my home network and make APRS available. So if for any reason internet went down, I would still have APRS on my home network. And when I go to work, they have Wi-Fi that's available to me there as well, and I could make it log into that as well. In addition, if I get really good at programming in the Raspberry Pi, I could make it so that the Pi checks to see if it has internet access. If it has internet access, then it can go ahead and power down the radio and not bother running it, because we can get the APRS information from the APRS servers. So, yeah, that's kind of the full rundown. I would like to note down that if you're interested in the, we'll come back to that. If you're interested in this virtual serial port emulator, you can get that from eterlogic.com. And I believe if you're running 32-bit operating system, you can download, here it is, VSPE for free. However, if you're running a 64-bit system like myself, you're going to have to, well, you're either going to have to put up with the pop-up that tells you to buy a key every time it boots up, or you're going to have to buy a key. You will be able to use it and begin testing it, and I tell you, it's definitely worth it if you run more than one mapping software at a time and you want that GPS to be available to those other mapping softwares, as this is definitely the route to go. It's definitely worth the $25. Occasionally I will open up a topographical map as well, and it's nice to have the topographical map available to me in addition to the APRS and the traditional map. So if you are going to try to do this, your biggest trouble, or at least my biggest trouble, was learning serial to net. It actually is not very complicated, but there's just so many things coming together. When it didn't work, I didn't know if I had a problem with my TNC, or if I had a problem with enabling my serial port, or if I had a problem with porting that to the router, or if I had a problem on the receiving end and I wasn't connecting to it and setting the connections right. So there was lots and lots of experiments, and the biggest thing that helped me, I was reading and reading and reading. A lot of it goes over my head, but down here for error, I read that and it gave me a lot of insight. So I learned how to open the syslog, and I could read the errors that were being generated because I wasn't entering the information for configuring the serial to net correctly. And once I knew that the errors were being saved in the system log, I had to find out where to go to get the system log information. And that, yeah, if you want to read that, it's this command right here: cat /var/log/syslog, and it will show you the entire system log. I believe you can also throw in a pipe grep and then serial to net or ser to net, and that will give you a more specific readout of any errors pertaining to the sys to net program running. So that is most of my project. I will put links to most of the things that I've come up against, as well as some more of the specifics. I have a running project file that I keep some of the resources and some of my notes about what I've done available. Future plans are to get my Raspberry Pi mounted in a project box, and I would like my project box to actually be able to control the radio, so that the Raspberry Pi can turn the radio on and off as needed, as well as a manual override up by the driver for regular voice communication. To go further, I want to get a secondary battery that can be charged either from land power or from the engine if the engine is running, and I want to try to get all that to be automated. So I've been looking at this piece of hardware from West Mountain Radio. It is it's a charger and switchover. It's really designed to be used in your Radio Shack. You'll hook it up to a large battery, and you'll hook your radio to your out and your power supply to your in, and as long as you have power, it'll run the radio. If you lose power, it'll immediately and seamlessly switch you over to the battery, and you'll continue to run on the battery. It has a built-in smart charger for gel cells as well as absorbed glass material batteries. So that's one of the things that's particularly appealing to me, is that it will maintain a good battery. However, I intend to go a step further. I will have the land power will be from a radio AC to DC power supply, but it can also be switched over to power that comes from my alternator when the engine is on. This way I don't run my battery for my car dead, as I have so many times in the past, trying to run a laptop and a radio and a Raspberry Pi and a charger for my spare battery and all the other things that I plug into my car. So hopefully then I can just at the end of the day plug in an outlet under the back of my car, and that'll charge my battery for my radio, and will not have to drain the whole system all the time. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comments. I will be monitoring them. I know that this is not the kind of video that I'm going to get a bunch of people going blah 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 about silly controversial issues. This is a technical video for people who love projects. And you guys always ask good, intelligent questions, so I will definitely be going through any comments that are made, and I will try to address any questions that you have. So, have a good day, and hopefully you will be able to watch the second video when I have all of this mounted in my car. 73 KD8 LKQ. Goodbye.